Welcome to Friday's edition of Renew Plus. I'm Pastor Tony. Thank you for joining us again today, and this is our final lesson in our series we've entitled Faith Life. Boy, there's so much else we could say and cover in this series, but I believe we've gotten the basic things across to you. As you get these down the inside of you, as you begin to apply these to your daily life, I believe you're going to see changes in your life for the positive. Now we're going to look at a couple of examples from the Word of God today of individuals, people whose lives were changed in a positive way, who reached a greater destination, who actually reached out and received God's best in their life, and it was all through this avenue of faith. Even in the face of adversity, of external pressures, of things that looked like it would have kept them away, obstacles and hindrances that would have kept them away normally, how they pressed on through, how they fought the good fight of faith, and how they saw the end of their faith, which was God's best in their life. Let's look over to the Gospel of Mark chapter 5. The Gospel of Mark chapter 5, and we're going to look at a couple of cases here. Verse number 21 to begin with. This is one I really want to cover today. Verse 21 and following, it says, "Now when Jesus had crossed over again by boat to the other side, a great multitude gathered to him, and he was by the sea." Verse 22 and says, "And behold, one of the rulers of the synagogue came, Jairus by name, and when he saw him, he fell at his feet, and he begged him earnestly, saying, My daughter, a little daughter, lies at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her, that she may be healed, and she will live." Now that's a positive declaration of faith right there. He says, he's imploring Jesus, but he says, come and lay your hands on her, that she may be healed, and she will live. So he expressed a confession of faith right here, a declaration of faith. This was not just, Jesus, please come and do it. He's actually making a declaration of faith in the middle of this. Now, so verse 24, "So Jesus went with him, and a great multitude followed him and thronged him." So notice this, Jesus is following this man based on his declaration of faith right here. Now, from verse 25 through verse 34, they get interrupted on their way to Jairus' house for Jesus to minister healing to his daughter by a woman with the issue of blood. I want to get back to her again in just a minute, because that's also a great story. But I want to pick this story up down right after that in verse number 35. It says, "While he was still speaking," Jesus was talking to this woman with the issue of blood after she received her healing. "While Jesus was still speaking, some came from the ruler of the synagogue's house, who said, 'Your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further?'" I tell you, this situation went worse. After Jairus made a declaration of faith, and Jesus was following him on the way. They were on their way to Jairus' house. I want you to see, in the middle of this, after this woman with the issue of blood kind of interrupted this situation, all of a sudden there were some that came from the ruler of the synagogue's house that said, "Your daughter is dead." Now, at this point, you know, most people would just say, well, they would have got offended. They would have thrown in the towel, and they would have just said, forget it. I mean, there's nothing more we can do here. This situation went from bad to the worst possible condition. There's nothing else. It's impossible now. And I thought this faith stuff worked. I thought Jesus could help me, but we just didn't get there in time. But I want you to see here in verse 36, as soon as Jesus heard the word that was spoken, the Amplified says he overheard what was being said from these friends of his that came from his house that said this, told him this bad report. But it also says in Amplified that Jesus ignored it. Jesus ignored it. Now here it says, as soon as Jesus heard the word that was spoken, he said to the ruler of the synagogue, "Do not be afraid, only believe." Now what is Jesus telling him right here? The declaration of faith that you already gave, that you have already spoken, you just continue to believe that same thing. I'm on the way. I'm going with you. Jesus said, do not be afraid. Now why? Because he knew that that bad report could have produced extreme fear in Jairus. And that fear could have caused disruption on the course of faith and what was going on here. It would have kept him from finishing his course and seeing the end result of his walk of faith. So Jesus said to him, "Do not be afraid, only believe." Only believe what? Only believe what he's already said, what he believed to begin with. And so verse 37, and he permitted no one to follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. Then he came to the house of the ruler of the synagogue and saw a tumult. Now, that was common for that day. This was not just people sitting around when somebody died. These were people that were carrying on. These were people that were getting with it. They were wailing and moaning. I'm telling you, it was hysterical. That's what he's talking about. They saw a tumult, and those who wept and wailed loudly. And when he came in, he said to them, "Why make this commotion and weep? The child is not dead, but sleeping." He just stirred the pot right here. Jesus just stirred up all these people in this tumult. Verse 40, and they ridiculed him. I guess so, because they knew she was dead, and she was not sleeping. And they were thinking, who is this guy coming in here and saying this? He's just rubbing salt in the wound, so to speak. He was just making matters worse by coming here and saying such a thing. So they ridiculed him. But when he had put them all outside, I tell you, when you got unbelief and fear and that kind of stuff going on, hysterics, you need to put it outside. Put it outside your heart. Put it outside your life. It says he put them all outside. He took the father and the mother of the child and those who were with him, and he entered where the child was lying. Verse 41, then he took the child by the hand and said to her, Talitha cumi, that's another language, which is translated, little girl, I say to you, arise. Now notice Jesus said words. He used his faith. Jairus was still, the reason Jesus is there is because Jairus didn't give up. He didn't throw in the towel. He didn't quit. He fought the good fight of faith, even though his mind and emotions, I'm sure, were just going bonkers when they told him this. And when he got to his house and he heard this tumult and all this weeping and wailing and all this stuff going on, I'm sure his mind and mental capacity, I'm sure it was just all over the place. But you know what? Jesus was there. The author and the finisher of his faith was still there with him. And so Jesus spoke words. He said, little girl, I say to you, arise. Verse 42, immediately the girl arose and walked, for she was 12 years of age, and they were overcome with great amazement. Notice this whole destination, this whole direction of this girl's life, of Jairus' house life, was all changed because he finished the race of faith. He finished the course of faith. He had faith and patience working, endurance working for him. He refused to give up. He refused to quit in the face of the worst report you could possibly get. I tell you, that's a lesson for all of us right there. That on our course of faith, when we've already made our declaration, our confession of faith, and then all of a sudden we get hit with a bad report, probably maybe the worst report. You know, the best thing we can do is do not fear, only believe. You know, there's no record here that Jairus said anything or did anything otherwise. You know what? He just kept walking. He just held fast to his confession. He just held fast to the confession he had made earlier and just kept walking with Jesus. Let me tell you something. You're not alone in your faith walk. The author and the finisher of your faith is walking alongside of you. There's no reason to give up and quit and let go of your confession. If you've already made your confession, you've already prayed the prayer of faith, you know what? You just keep walking. In the middle of adversity, in the middle of external pressures, bad reports, emotions, everybody else giving a tumult around you, you just keep on walking. Your miracle is going to happen if you reach your destination of faith. You know, in the middle of this, we just mentioned there was another story about the woman with the issue of blood. I don't have time to read it all. We've already read a lot of that in this series. But this woman with the issue of blood, she was faced with a 12-year-long incurable blood flow. In other words, the Bible says she went to many physicians, suffered many things from many physicians. She was no better but rather grew worse over this course of time, over 12 years. And she had spent all that she had. In other words, she went broke in the process. But what changed her life is that she heard about Jesus. She gave heed, her ear, and she gave heed in her heart to the words that she heard about Jesus. What did she hear? She probably heard the messages Jesus gave of hope, the kind of miracles that were happening. And you know what? All of a sudden on the inside of her, that sparked hope. That gave her some hope on the inside. She began to see herself being healed. In fact, she said over and over again, if I can just touch the hem of Jesus' garment, I shall be made well. The Greek actually says she said that over and over and over again. She was saying this again and again and again and again. What was she doing? She was building the root system of hope. She was seeing herself touching the hem of Jesus' garment, seeing herself being healed of that plague that she had grown worse with for 12 years. No natural hope available. And you know what? Jesus came to town one day, and all his entourage. But you know what the bad thing was? Jesus came, but she could barely see his head over the crowd. There was such a crowd pressing in around Jesus, she couldn't get to Jesus and carry out what she saw herself doing, touching the hem of Jesus' garment. But you know what? She would not quit. She would not be deterred. She made her way through the press behind. She made her way through that crowd, and she reached out and touched Jesus' garment, and immediately that thing left in her body. You know what? She refused to give up and quit. She could have been stoned out there that day in public for being out there in that condition by the law. But you know what? She threw caution to the wind. Her faith was driving her. That hope and faith and patience that we've been talking about was driving her to her miracle. And she got it that day. You know what? It wasn't that Jesus touched her. She touched Jesus by faith. And Jesus commended her. He said, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your affliction." You know, there was a couple of more situations. I think we've alluded to Luke chapter 5, verse 17 through 25 or 26, somewhere in there, is about the paralyzed man on a flat borne by four. In other words, there were four of his crazy faith friends with him, carrying him, and they were going to carry him to Jesus' healing miracle meeting. And it was in a house. And when they got to that house, there was again such a crowd around that house, they could find no way to get in. There was all the doors were blocked, the windows were blocked. They could hear Jesus in there. They might could see him through kind of the crowd there, but there was no way they could get their friend on that cot into there before Jesus, into that stretcher. So you know what they did? Because hope, faith, and patience were driving this thing, they were walking this thing out. They refused to quit, refused to give up. They climbed up on the roof, tore up the roof on this guy's house, whoever it was, and lowered this man down in the midst before Jesus. And you know what? Jesus saw their faith. And you know what? This man walked out healed because he refused to quit and give up. You know, even in the middle of discouraging events, all those crowds around him, they made a way. Faith will make a way when there seems to be no way. Because I tell you, you see yourself with what God has for you, God's best. You lay hold of that. You possess that on the inside of you. And you're not going to let any circumstance, any condition, any adversity, any clock or calendar talk you out of that. No crowd, nothing going to talk you out of it. You're going to reach out. You're going to get it. You know, there's one more that I want to just give you real quickly is about blind Bartimaeus. Well, he wasn't blind after Jesus got done with him, but he was blind before that. It's found over in Mark chapter 10, verse 46 through 52. He was crying out one day. Of course, he couldn't see. He was blind, and he was also a beggar. And Jesus came across that day and came by him on the road with his entourage again. And he heard it was Jesus, and he began to cry out, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." And some of the religious folks went over there and said, "Shh, now the master's coming by. This is a church service. We need to be quiet here. And so you just need to quieten it down." You know what? Bartimaeus just cranked it up. He just cranked it up a few decibel levels. He just began to cry out even more. "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." And he just said that over and over again. He was shouting that because you know why? Faith and patience were driving him to receive what God had for him that day. And you know what? Jesus heard it. And he called him over to him. And his disciples went over there. Some of the crowd went over there and said, you know, relax. The master is calling you. And he did something very significant. He threw aside the garment he had been wearing. Now, why was that significant? Because that garment that Bartimaeus was wearing identified him as a blind and beggar man. He threw that aside. You know why? Because he knew when he went to Jesus, he was not going to be a blind beggar anymore. Jesus was about to end that career and start a new one. And he was refusing to quit and give up. And of course, Jesus said, what do you want me to do for you? He said that I may receive my sight. And Jesus said, as you have believed, so be it done unto you. And he received his miracle that day. He saw the end of his faith because he refused to quit and give up. That is good news. And I'll tell you what, that is all the time I've got for today, this week, and this series. Let me ask you this. If you've got a testimony where you've used your faith and received a miracle from God, just as we've been describing, I don't care how big or small it is, or how seemingly insignificant, I want you to write us. Go onto our website. Call us, write us, email us, whatever. We want to know about it. We want to rejoice with you. So please let us know about your testimonies of faith. Join us again as we go into another series, another exciting series here in just a short period of time. Tune in again. If you'd like additional resources and materials, go to tonycowan.org. We will see you in the next series.